So what we're going to be talking about today is pretty much setting up an editing session. All right. And in the other videos, we'll talk a little bit about the actual editing techniques. But a big thing I wanted to do with you guys this semester is establish good workflows that you can continue to use as you navigate through Pro Tools. All right. So I have the audio loaded up here from the song Fair Chance that you'll be editing. And there are quite a few parts, and there's also a score, a musical score that I involved in the overall file. So that can help you, if you know how to read music and know how to read a score, that can help you understand where all the parts and where all the music fits in. All right, so I very simply just dragged and dropped this right into Pro Tools, but you could also, you know, go to import and then import it in this way. All right. So, the first thing you'll want to do is import all your files. And, I like to align them to the beginning for the most part. All right. If we take a listen to what's going on, you'll notice that there's a little count-in. And this is really helpful in this case because this will help you sync up all the parts. Whenever you're asking people to do, these kind of separate audio recordings that are really popular today, just make sure you have an impulse point like this to help you line up the parts once you get all of them. So let me play it a little bit.
Get ready to clap on beat 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. Clap. Thank you. Now smile and have fun. 1.
Right, so when you hear this now, you as the engineer have a really good impulse point to do some editing with. All right, so that helped me align the tracks. You can see that they're mostly the same length, and because I have that impulse point, I can really make sure that things are synced up. All right. But the other thing I want to make sure to do every time I create a session, make sure we go up to track. And you can always use the key command, shift to command N, and create a stereo master fader. All right. Part of the reason why this is so important is because then we get a combination of all these signals. All right. So let me go over to the mixer view and let me put all these tracks back to where they were initially. So let's check out the audio volume with all these tracks in place.
Get ready to clap on beat 1. 1, 2, 3, 4.
All right, so hopefully you could hear that crunch and that clipping. So this is why it's really important to have the master fader so you can clearly see when things are clipping and crunching and everything. All right, so when I first upload tracks, especially for editing, one of the things I do is I go over to the area where the tracks and the groups are, and I hit all. And the first thing I do, just to avoid that kind of clipping, is I drag all the faders down. All right. And it's extreme, but the point is to try and prevent the clipping on the master fader. Now, one thing that you have to do after you group all of the faders together to drag them all together, you have to ungroup them and then restore the master fader track And I'm also going to restore my mic track back to its normal volume. So one way you can do that is actually by hitting the Alt or the Option key on your keyboard, and then look what happens. It sets, your system back to 0. I lost my video. Hello. That's okay. And I'll do that for my microphone track too, because I want to be heard. So what I'm going to do now is play this audio back. We'll hear that this is at a much better level, so we're not clipping. So first and foremost, just take care of clipping issues. Don't let that persist because it will plague you the whole time. All right. Again, I like to use the groups to basically put everything together and edit things at the same time, and then you can always take it off. All right. So what we can also do at this point is just make sure our Pro Tools session file can handle this type of processing. So I personally have a lot of issues with this because I only have an 8 gig Mac mini, so I've had to do a lot of file management and session management. So one thing you can do, go up to the setup window, go to Playback Engine, all right? And when I'm done recording and I'm just editing, mixing, mastering, what I like to do is increase the hardware buffer size. Basically, when we have a lower buffer size, the computer has to work harder to prevent latency while recording. So generally, when you record, you want to have a lower size here. But once you're done recording, try and go higher, because then the computer doesn't have to work as hard to process. The one caveat is that it does create a delay and create latency. So if you're trying to record, when you're talking, there's likely going to be a delay. All right. The other thing I would do is just disable the video engine. We're not editing video, so that'll also save you some processing power. All right. So I'm going to hit OK. And, this will really help you quite a bit as you're editing and your files get bigger and you add more plugins to your work. All right. So what I want to do now is start to think about lining up our project to a defined beat and grid. All right. So what we can do is create a click track. So go up to track, create click track. And if we look on the bottom here, we now have a metronome. So let's take a listen. Go back to the beginning.
Get ready to clap.
So notice that this is not necessarily synced up. So what we have to do is make sure we get the tempo to be at the right speed. So what we'll do is go up to our ruler area and we'll change the tempo right from the beginning of the song. If you're missing any of these options, just right click in this general area and you can add and remove whatever you don't want. I'll remove the time code, sample, meter. I don't need that right now. Yeah, let's keep bars and beats. I'll keep markers as well and the tempo. All right, so what we'll do, see this little red icon here, double click, and now we can set a new tempo right from the beginning of the song. What's really helpful is that we can tap to tempo to try and line up the tempo. All right, so let the song play for a little bit. Okay. once I let the song play, I'm going to open up this red icon and I'm going to tap the tempo that I'm hearing. And eventually it's going to stabilize around a number, and that'll be the number I set the project to. All right? All right, so let me play. All right, so I figured that the tempo kind of averages out around 105. And notice how once I got that tempo to average out, I actually ended up linking the project very well. What I did, just to go back here, is I hit the letter T as the music was playing, and that activates the tap to tempo function. So that's how you can calculate what's going on in real time. All right, so open up this window, hit T over and over again to the beat, and that's how you can get the tap to tempo feature. All right, so let's take a listen. And this track is a really great example of why you should always get everybody to record to a click. Create click tracks for people like we heard here at the very beginning of the song, because it really sets people up.
Get ready to clap on beat 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. Clap. Thank you. Now smile and have fun.
So just record yourself, and it makes a world of a difference to get people in sync when you're working with a ton of musicians. Okay, so now that we have our tempo, right, and things generally lined to a grid, I would actually activate grid mode if we go up to the edit modes. And so this way we get our fine grid. If your grid isn't as precise, right? Look at how fine-tuned mine is. You can go up to this grid area, and this is where you can turn the grid on and off, as you can see here. But you can also change the fineness of the grid. So I'll leave it at 64 so I have a lot of precision. All right. If you're missing this option here, I'm clipping. Oops. You can right click in this gray area, and you should be able to find, the transport controls, zoom controls, output, MIDI controls. That's where all these extra features hide. All right, cool. So now that we have it in grid mode, one thing that I'm going to do, since I'm editing, I'm going to get rid of this countdown area. Don't really need it anymore. Everything's synced up. So I'm going to zoom in. All right. Oops. And see these blue lines? These represent the bars, essentially. All right. And so since everything's synced up, I'm going to try and cut down the audio to the closest bar that exists, right, without cutting off any of the downbeats of the music itself. So it's looking about maybe till like 7 here. So what I'll do again is use the group function, because once I move one thing, everything will follow in the edit window, just like it does for the mix window. So I'm going to drag all the way to 7. I want to leave a little bit of room here just because when you're mastering, it's actually nice to have some organic track, because then you can end up using that to edit out noise and other kind of room tones and things. All right, so let me make sure groups is still selected here. And what I'll do is just move everything to the very beginning of the song. All right, so let's take a listen, make sure everything's all lined up. Hello.
3.
All right, so now we cut out that early pre-roll, and then we just have the parts we want to edit for the most part. So I'll zoom out. Cool. And so again, this is all about getting yourself a nice, clean template to work with. All right, so we just grouped them all, we trimmed. Don't forget to turn the group off, because otherwise if you go to edit one thing, it'll edit everything. All right, so the next thing I would do, especially in terms of setup, is add some markers, right? Because that way we'll mark key and important parts of the song. So, I would say this very beginning part, I position my cursor and hit the little plus button for markers and call this like vocal acapella. Oof, I can't spell. Oops, vocal acapella, right? And so this gives me important information, especially in a track this big. And, I can kind of look out for different entrances. Let's see here. Oh, this electric guitar. So let me go over here and mark, electric, I just got a guitar entrance. All right. And so now take a listen. Though you're not right? And so what that does, especially when you're editing something this big, is it saves you time and it keeps you organized. And also, if someone else is going to be processing this project, whether they're mixing, mastering, this really helps them out too, knowing what's going on. All right, so these are some of the basics of setting up a session here. Remember, there is a score included in the overall project file, so you can use that to follow along and, set your markers, but you can also use your ears. So the last thing I would do after this basic setup is I would go up to File, whenever you're done, you feel comfortable, and I would hit Save Copy In. So what Save Copy In does is it gives you an opportunity to write all of the files together and make sure they are grouped and they appear every time you're trying to make a track in Pro Tools. All right. Sometimes, and I'm sure you guys have experienced this, when you are working in Pro Tools and you try and open up a project later, a message pops up and it's like, how do I relink these files and manually search for them? When you do Save Copy In, this basically gives you the opportunity to select what gets saved. I would suggest to you, number one, don't change any of these settings. You don't want to change your sample rate, your bit depth, keep it where it is. Number two, you don't need to save that much. So I would just select audio files. This will ensure that next time you open up that specific Pro Tools session, everything will be there. When you're sending something to a mixing, mastering engineer, this is what you should do to make sure all the files for the project show up. All right, you hit OK. Maybe I broke it. Okay, and name it whatever you want. You could say, you know, ready for mixing, advanced audio demonstration, whatever this is called. Save it to the desktop. And again, I would get into the habit of saving all your sessions like this, because in that way you'll end up always ensuring that you have your audio. All right, so that's it for this video. I'll record some more videos about editing techniques, but feel free to ask questions. So just make sure you're developing a good and clean workflow so you don't waste time trying to find files, or even like, oh, where does this guitar come in, or where does this part happen? Just create a clean workflow. And what's great is once you find something that works for you, you can go up to File and save it as a template and recall that template every time that you're doing something in Pro Tools. All right? So that's it for now. See you next video.